They present the Russians as like asking for it, deserving of retaliation. And to a certain degree, I understand why like Ukraine would do everything in its power to try to make this invasion costly, in the exact same ways that I understand why the Palestinian population that has been held captive for 75 years, 76 years of occupation will try to make that occupation costly. Let's talk about Ukraine. Let's talk about Donald Trump and Tim Pool's favorite country. Ukraine is an enemy of mankind. It is kind of crazy how the guy who was openly paid by the Russian government to do anti-Ukrainian propaganda and his statements are now being echoed by the current president. What do I mean by this? We made fun of Tim Pool slamming the table and saying Ukraine is an enemy of mankind so many times over. We made fun of Tim Pool, who was paid by the government to say these things. We made fun of Tim Pool saying you have to apologize to Russia. He said Zelensky has to apologize to Russia for just kind of looking sexy, kind of looking like they wanted to be invaded. And now we are unironically living in a reality where Trump is demanding that as well. Like that's where we're at. We are officially at the stage where Donald Trump, the president, is repeating the statements coming from the baldest political commentator who was paid by the Russian government. Wild set of circumstances, real wild stuff. Anyway, what is Ukraine doing in the process as they are stuck between a rock and a hard place, as the American side basically demands more from Ukraine, demands more extraction from Ukraine? Well, they're trying to hit back to the best of their ability. They hit Moscow with a massive Ukrainian drone attack. Let's take a look.
Massive Ukrainian drone strike on the Russian capital overnight. According to Russian state media, defense forces intercepted more than 300 drones fired at Russia, with 91 of them specifically targeting the Moscow region. Officials say one person was killed and several others wounded. The attack unfolded just hours before.
I'm not exactly a fan of any nation hitting back against targets, some of which are around civilian areas. But what are these guys supposed to do at this point? I want Donald Trump to actually put together a ceasefire. That's what I want. And apparently it might happen. But it's just crazy to me that Donald Trump's actions out and about, consistently talking about how, Zell Disney ain't shit. He's a dictator. He's the reason why Vladimir Putin invaded Russia. All this stuff is most likely agitating Ukrainians, is probably contributing to a ceasefire not happening. This is what's frustrating to me about the Trump commentary on this.
For critical talks between the US and Ukraine on ending the war with Russia. That meeting in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, is set to begin in less than 2 hours. And it comes less than 2 weeks after the last US-Ukraine meeting at the White House ended quite badly. This time, Volodymyr Zelensky is not expected to take part in the actual talks with the US, but the Ukrainian president is in Saudi Arabia meeting with the Crown Prince. The top American diplomat says he wants to know what concessions Ukraine would be willing to make, adding that these talks will be key in determining whether the US will lift its pause on military aid and intelligence sharing. CNN's Claire Sebastian's following all of these developments, joins me here now in London. Claire, let's get to that massive drone attack we saw images of there in Moscow overnight. I guess the timing of this, unlikely to have been a coincidence with these talks set to get underway in less than 2 hours.
Yeah, Christina, look, we haven't officially heard anything from Ukraine.
What about Russian concessions? I don't know what the Russian concessions are going to look like, but I am not very confident that there will be any Russian concessions, considering how Trump has talked about this issue.
This is ending this war once and for all.
Because the reality of the matter is, Donald Trump is openly in broad daylight saying a whole bunch of stuff that is pro-Russia, okay? In a way that I think undercuts a potential ceasefire negotiation. I think he's bullying Zelensky far too much. I think he's undermining his own far too much. That's it. Like that is the reason why I have no confidence whatsoever in the Trump administration actually giving anything to the Ukrainian side that will make the Ukrainians feel like all of the dead were worth something, you know? And I think that has to happen. That has to happen because it is the moral thing to do. That also has to happen because that is important for stability. And yet, do I have any confidence that Donald Trump will do anything like that? Absolutely not. I don't. Let's continue.
On this very large barrage of drones, some 337 in total shot down in various different regions, 91 over the Moscow region, according to the Russian Defense Ministry. Ukraine hasn't said anything, but I think, as you say, timing is hardly coincidental coming ahead of these critical talks in Saudi Arabia. It was a fairly disruptive, not to mention destructive attack, one death. It's pretty rare to see deaths from Ukrainian drone attacks as far away from the Ukrainian border as this. I think there's only ever been one other in Moscow, and that was last September. So definitely noteworthy disruption as well, with airport closures and delays to flights there. And I think this is potentially, from Ukraine, a way of sending a message. Their long-range drone program is something that has been homegrown, that has proven extremely effective in this war in terms of hitting Russian military sites, energy infrastructure, and of course, on several occasions, the capital itself, again, far beyond.
There is something also interesting about this, where even when they talk about Russian targets, like, although Russia is the foreign adversary here, mainstream media, when they talk about Russian targets, they still use different words than the way they would use when talking about Gaza. I do think that that is like underlying white supremacy for sure. Because like Russians are the bad guys, right? They present the Russians as the bad guys. They present the Russians as like asking for it, deserving of retaliation. And to a certain degree, I understand why like Ukraine would do everything in its power to try to make this invasion costly. In the exact same ways that I understand why the Palestinian population that has been held captive for 75 years, 76 years of occupation will try to make that occupation costly. What's interesting, however, is that even when the Ukrainian retaliation is being talked about and they talk about like Russian casualties in the process, they still recognize the humanity of Russians in a way where you rarely ever hear that recognition when it's Israel blowing up entire blocks of their captive civilian population in Gaza. Just something that I've noticed. Like, we don't extend grace to, we don't extend the same grace to victims of our foreign adversaries as we do to Ukraine. We do not extend that to people in Gaza, but we don't even extend the level of grace that we offer who are experiencing retaliatory attacks in comparison to the civilian population of Gaza. It is wild to see.
The border, they claim, as of now, according to the defense minister, to be the world's largest producer of tactical and strategic drones. So this is, to quote the US president, a card potentially that they can play in this war and in peace talks. And as I said, this is happening on this extremely critical day diplomatically. In terms of what these talks in Saudi Arabia today could bring in terms of a path to peace, I think the expectations have been lowered somewhat by the US side ahead of this. Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, saying that this is really more of an exploratory meeting, that the US will be in listening mode, he said, and they're really just trying to figure out which concessions Ukraine will be willing to make, which they will then present to Russia. Incidentally, a source familiar with the matter has told CNN that Steve Witkoff, Trump's Middle East envoy, is expected in Russia later this week. We don't know as of yet who he will be meeting with. But in terms of this meeting today in Saudi Arabia, I think the first job for Ukraine is to repair the damage from that Oval Office meeting less than 2 weeks ago. Marco Rubio saying that potentially there could be a deliverable there when it comes to unpausing US aid. He said the meeting will be key, and if they come out and, quote, feel good about that, then potentially decisions would be made on that front. So it's a little nebulous what Ukraine is supposed to do, but I think the suggestion there is that they will have to continue.
Why is Saudi Arabia the mediator here? Because they're an oil giant. I mean, there's a couple different reasons. Because they are the main beneficiary party of OPEC Plus, which Russia is also a part of. So they have some level of influence over Russia because of the financial ties that they have. They also are looking to be in the good graces of the Western world. They actively do this with the sports washing that we've talked about. But beyond sports washing, I think that they want to become a more important player in the region, like a geopolitical player. And Trump will gladly give that to them. Trump is a massive fan, of course. As you guys know, he's a massive fan of Saudi Arabia. He loves the money that they have. So I think those are some of the reasons as to why Saudi Arabia is at the table. I mean, obviously, they will never come close to my GOAT, Erdogan, right? Erdogan is the table. He's at the table. He is the table. Make no mistake. Saudi Arabia is just trying to be like Qatar. They can't even be, but they'll never be like Turkey.
Continue with the sort of charm offensive as they try to repair that relationship and restore U.S. aid.
Breaking this morning, Russia accuses Ukraine of launching a massive drone attack on Moscow. Explosions seen rocking the city overnight. In all, Russia says more than 300 drones were fired, nearly 100 targeting Moscow, and 2 people were killed. In Ukraine, more than 30 people have been killed since last Friday. The war raging on as the possible peace talks finally resume. CNN's Elena Trina is standing by for us at the White House. Let's first go to Alex Marquardt in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia for the latest from there. What are you hearing? What is the latest, Alex?
Well, Kate, this meeting has been underway for almost 2 hours now here at the Ritz-Carlton in Jeddah. They are behind closed doors. We have seen that video of the 2 delegations at that long table with Saudi officials at the head, Rubio and Waltz on one side across from the Ukrainian delegation led by the Zelensky chief of staff, Andriy Yermak. The vibe from both sides is quite good after a week and a half of really tumultuous relations. But coming into this meeting, Secretary Rubio said that he is hopeful that it will go well, but it's clear that he wants to hear something from the Ukrainian side. He said that they are in listening mode. They want to hear what concessions the Ukrainians might be willing to give in order to achieve some kind of peace deal with the Russians.
Luckily, Donald Trump is not there, so they can actually have a normal conversation. And Marco Rubio can play the role of that he's supposed to be playing, which is like, you know, a normal war hawk politician that will go along with whatever the American State Department's true vision is for Ukraine, rather than have someone like Donald Trump actively throw Molotov cocktails in any sort of conversation for pure narcissistic desires that he has.
Now, a few of us reporters spoke with Andriy Yermak, Zelensky's chief of staff, ahead of this meeting. He declined to say what concessions specifically they could offer, but here's a little bit of what he did say.
Now we think it's necessary to discuss the most important how to start this process, and we're very open. We're very open, and we want to have very constructive, deep, friend partners conversation with our American partners.
So the priority, Yermak is saying, is jump-starting this process. Kate, we should note the U.S. has not specified what concessions they are expecting the Russians to give. You talked about the military and intelligence aid that has been halted for Ukraine. Rubio is saying that this meeting is key to essentially getting that turned back on. And then we have this massive Ukrainian strike against Russia overnight, perhaps one of the biggest carried out by drones since this war began. More than 300 drones fired at Russia, certainly coming at a very symbolic time. Presumably, Kate, whatever comes out of this meeting between the U.S. and Ukraine will be communicated to the Russians as the U.S. tries to bring Ukraine and Russia closer together. And we have just learned late last night that Steve Witkoff, who is the Middle East envoy but very much involved in these talks, should be going to Russia later this week and could be meeting with Vladimir Putin. Kate?
Yeah, I mean, really what you're encapsulating perfectly is just how critical this week may shape up to be when it comes to trying to find a peaceful end. So much. Alex is going to be standing by, a lot to come out of Jeddah. But let's get over to the White House now. Elena Treen, as I mentioned, is standing by. Elena, what are you hearing from there this morning about all of this?
Well, look, Kate, I think this meeting today is as much about trying to get the relations between the United States and Ukraine back on track after that, acrimonious Oval Office meeting about a week and a half ago now, as it is about trying to find really an off-ramp to this war and beginning in earnest the peace talks with Ukraine and Russia to find an end to this. But look, when I talk to White House officials, Trump administration officials, repeatedly what comes up in my conversations is they want specifics from the Ukrainians and Zelensky about what they are willing, as Alex laid out, to concede on. And that's really going to be, I think, a crucial part of this meeting today. When I spoke with one White House official, they told me that they're looking for Ukraine to commit to what they characterized as, quote, concrete deliverables for this peace process. And I've also spoke about this directly with a National Security Advisor, Michael Waltz. He has repeatedly said he needs to see some real specific action, specific things laid out by the Ukrainians for them to feel comfortable moving forward. Now, one thing just to keep in mind as well is just how fragile the relationship between President Donald Trump and Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, is at this moment. Yes, we know that the president and many White House officials felt they were happy with that letter that Zelensky sent the president last week, where he kind of laid out all of the things that they were looking for following that disastrous Oval Office meeting. But the president is still very wary of Zelensky. Just this weekend, he argued again that he believes Zelensky is not grateful for aid to the United States. So all of that kind of playing out in the background of this meeting. But again, I think so much of this is really trying to get them back on track of the relations as much as it is really trying to move forward with peace talks. Kate?
Absolutely, Elena. Thank you so much. Just as the war rages on, thank you very much. Elena Treen is going to watch this closely from the White House for us.
The insistence on the U.S. requesting concrete concessions is so sus, especially considering how the U.S. is posturing against Ukraine. I mean, I think that the demands being made from the Ukrainian side for concrete concessions is understandable. That happens for both sides. The fact that it's publicly being made and never actually being, never actually presented as like concessions from the Russian side, that part is worrisome. I think that in and of itself shows where their actual goals are, like what their actual goals are. And their goals seemingly is to just get Ukraine to say, shut the fuck up, eat it. You're going to get nothing. You're going to get nothing out of this. Ukraine's presidential office. But then again, I don't know, because what the Trump administration says and what the Trump administration does are two entirely different things. And it's fairly frequently like they will say, we're going to do tariffs. Then they'll say, we're not going to do tariffs. They'll say, we're going to do mass layoffs. Then they will be like, oopsie, we're not doing mass layoffs. You know what I mean? So even with Ukraine, while Donald Trump has actively positioned himself as like a guy who is definitely on Vladimir Putin's side on this process, on this bargain, there are obviously going to be contradictory statements that he makes, because that's what he does. That's just how Trump is. But there's also the conflicting interests, the conflicting interests from capital owners that have to be factored into this equation. Having said that, the reason why I can't tell you honestly where this is going to go is because, like I said with Vladimir Putin, Trump is an actor that is sometimes very unpredictable. He's just unpredictable. He just says shit and then does the opposite. You know what I mean? I'm an NMP LOL viewer. Fuck Hasan. I'm leaving. Wait, what? What did I? What? Why? All right. Here's some details since that video came out. Obviously, Ukraine has accepted a U.S. proposal for a 30-day ceasefire. There's a Rubio-Waltz news conference taking place. This is coming out of Jeddah. Ukraine has agreed to accept a U.S. proposal for an immediate 30-day ceasefire and to take steps restoring a durable peace after Russia's invasion, according to a joint U.S.-Ukraine statement on Tuesday. The two sides meeting in Saudi Arabia also agreed to conclude as soon as possible a comprehensive agreement for developing Ukraine's critical mineral resources. So that was a brief blip that came out. And in that, hold on, there was also this. Ukraine also said that Russia has to agree first. So I'm going to show you what the Russian demands are, and I'll show you what the Ukrainians said as well. Ukraine's presidential office, according to Jackie Heinrich, who is the senior White House correspondent for Fox News, says the Ukraine's presidential office presenting this as a joint statement following talks with the U.S. delegation, which featured, of course, Marco Rubio, Waltz, and also, who can forget, Goatkov, my goat. Two notable points that they made were the United States will immediately lift the pause on intelligence sharing and resume security assistance to Ukraine. Both countries' presidents agreed to conclude as soon as possible a comprehensive agreement for developing Ukraine's critical mineral resources to expand Ukraine's economy, offset the cost of American assistance, and guarantee Ukraine's long-term prosperity and security. So, basically, it's what they said, that they were going to get out of the situation. But after a little bit of attrition, it seems like the Trump administration is, forcing Ukraine's hand, predictably, as of course they were inevitably going to do. How do we know that they were inevitably going to do that? Well, we know that they were inevitably going to do that because Trump is right when he says we hold all the cards. Technically, he is right, but it is correct. Majority Report, thank you for the raid. Did Majority Report just raid me? Is that what's happening? Why is someone saying Emily Ratajkowski is a HasanAbi head? Anyway, hope you had a good stream, Majority Reporters. Was talking to Uncle Sam earlier about his debate. Anyway, the Ukrainian delegation reiterated the Ukrainian people's strong gratitude to President Trump and the U.S. Congress and the people of the United States for making possible meaningful progress towards peace. Ukraine expressed readiness to accept the U.S. proposal to enact an immediate interim 30-day ceasefire, which can be extended by mutual agreement of the parties and which is subject to acceptance and concurrent implementation by the Russian Federation. The United States will communicate to Russia, and Russian reciprocity is the key to achieving peace. Let's take a look at the conversation that took place now, and then I'll give you Russian demands as well.
Today we made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable and accounts for their interests, their security, their ability to prosper as a nation. I want to personally thank, we both want to thank the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, His Majesty, for hosting us, for making this possible. They've been instrumental in this process, and we're very grateful to them for hosting us here today. And hopefully we'll take this offer now to the Russians. And we hope that they'll say yes, to peace. The ball's now in their court. And but again, the president's objective here is, number one, above everything else, he wants the war to end. And I think today Ukraine has taken a concrete step in that regard. We hope the Russians will reciprocate.
Well, just to add to the Secretary's comments, the Ukrainian delegation today made something very clear, that they share President Trump's vision for peace. They share his determination to end the fighting, to end the killing, to end the tragic kind of meat grinder of people and national treasure that's happening on the front in
Shonda Black, thank you for the raid. Hope you had a good stream.
In
Let's
Ukraine.
Go.
Number one. Number two, they made concrete steps and concrete proposals, not only accepting our proposal for a full...
This messaging is so much different than Trump and Vance. It's a bit jarring. It's not. The reason why, I get why you are confused, because Donald Trump is like so insane in comparison to these guys. But what these guys say is more important. That's why when Marco Rubio came out on Caitlin Collins in the talks collapsing after Donald Trump and J.D. Vance did the pettiest thing possible, I told you over and over again, what matters is what Marco Rubio says. Not because he has a lot of power or a lot of influence in the room. I think Donald Trump still has all this influence, but Marco Rubio will defend Donald Trump's posturing. He will change his messaging to defend Donald Trump's posturing. But at the end of the day, the reasonable heads will dictate the foreign policy. And if you recall, when we watched Marco Rubio talk about the Ukrainian negotiations, where it's at, where it's going to possibly go, I remember telling you, it's most likely still going to stay the course. And it's obvious that it is staying the course in terms of like establishing a mineral deal and like, and doing the bidding of the State Department, whatever they have made, whatever assessments they have made, rather than just enforcing petty grievances upon our proxy in this process.
Ceasefire, which you can see the details of which are in our joint statement that we released together. But we also got into substantive details on how this war is going to permanently end, what type of guarantees they're going to have for their long-term security. And
this is so funny. What? U.S. Secretary of State Rubio, I can assure you this, we will not be providing military aid to the Russians. Wait, what? No, there's no way this is real, man. Get out of here. I don't believe that did he actually say that? That's such a weird thing to say. Did he actually say that? If he did, why did he say that? That was something I joked about. That was something I joked about yesterday or the day prior where I was like, remember with Noah, I was talking with Noah about this where I was like, they're gonna help Russia invade Ukraine harder. And Mark was like, we're not doing that. We're not, please. We are doing that. We actually are doing that, but there's good reason for it.
prosperity, but also really looking at what it's going to take to finally end this, the horrific fighting. The other piece that I just want to make very clear is President Trump started this diplomatic effort in the Oval Office, talking to both leaders, both President Putin and President Zelensky back to back. And now
it's so funny. So much of these, so much of the statements that department heads have to do is just like glazing Trump for no reason. They just have to do it. Like this could be a 30-second statement, but the only reason why it's 11 minutes long is because for 10 minutes and 30 seconds they have to talk about how great Donald Trump is for yelling at Zelensky and how wonderful it's been, how wonderful it's been that that the Trump administration has been actively undermining our proxies in this conversation, the wronged party that was invaded by the foreign adversary. That's just, there's like 20% meat. The rest of it is all bone. Okay.
now that shuttle diplomacy can have a named delegation in terms of next steps from the Russian side. We have a named delegation.
Donald Trump is like, we need to do a, we need to do a mineral deal immediately so we can start putting tariffs on Ukraine. I love tariffs. Tariffs are my favorite. There's nothing I like more than tariffs. Tariffs to Ukraine.
In terms of next steps from the Ukrainian side, I will talk.
Donald Trump wants to ease sanctions on Russia so they can tariff Russia.
To my Russian counterpart in the coming days. Secretary Rubio will be with G7 foreign ministers in the next couple of days. We have the NATO Secretary General in the White House on Thursday, and we'll take the process forward from there. So, as a result of that, and I think as a result of this positive step forward, the president has decided to lift the pause on aid. And on our security assistance to Ukraine going forward. And that's effective immediately.
All right, your colleagues have chosen 3 questioners. Let's start with Alex Marquardt of CNN.
Thank you. Several questions on the ceasefire. We understood that coming into this was a Ukrainian proposal for a partial ceasefire. How did this become an American proposal for an immediate 30-day ceasefire? And to be clear, you're talking about a complete ceasefire across the front line, not just the aerial and maritime ceasefire that the Ukrainians proposed. And then finally, how do you expect to take this to the Russians? Is it Mr. Witkoff, who we understand is heading to Moscow later this week? Will he deliver that to Putin? Will it be President Trump to President Putin? Will it be you and your counterparts? How will that actually happen and when?
Well, on the first point, your question is yes. That's the offer. The offer is to stop the shooting. The goal here is, the only way out to end this war is to negotiate out of it. There's no military solution to this war. The solution to this war and the way to end it and to achieve the president's objective of peace is to negotiate. But before you can negotiate, you have to stop shooting at each other. And that's what the president has wanted to see, and that's the commitment we got today from the Ukrainian side, their willingness to do that. Obviously, now that'll be delivered to the Russians. It'll be delivered to them directly through multiple channels, meaning not only...
Now he's quoting you, Rubio's a HasanAbi head? Yeah. Marco Rubio is a famous HasanAbi head. And also a Russian op, just like me.
Well, they obviously see it. We've already, it'll be communicated to them through our diplomatic channels, through conversations and other methods. But they'll obviously be well aware. And our hope is that the Russians will say yes, that they will also agree. So the shooting will stop, the killing will stop, the dying will stop, and the talks can begin about how to end this war permanently in a way that's acceptable and enduring for both sides.
Look, there's been all kinds of discussions in terms of different types of ceasefires. There was the deal in terms of grain moving years ago. There's been discussion of halting aerial attacks on each other's infrastructure. The president has made it clear and certainly made it clear to us that all fighting needs to stop. And the Ukrainians have agreed to that proposal. They're ready for peace. And now we'll take that to the Russians and get their response.
All right, next, Jennifer Jacobs, CBS.
Great. Hi. Are you expecting any goodwill gestures from Russia? Do you have a deadline in mind for when you're hoping for them to reciprocate on that? Those two things.
Well, we're going to take the offer to them.
What if Russians say no? They already have, but that's a spoiler. I'm slowly but surely going through the story, even though in real time there's updates coming in. No spoilers, okay? We'll get to that in a second.
We're going to tell them this is what's on the table. Ukraine is ready to stop shooting and start talking. And now it'll be up to them to say yes or no. I hope they're going to say yes. And if they do, then I think we made great progress. If they say no, then we'll unfortunately know what the impediment is to peace here. But the president's been abundantly clear. He wants the shooting to stop. He wants the warfare to stop. He wants the dying and the suffering to stop. And he believes, and rightfully so, that the only way to end this war is to negotiate an end to it. And we think that it's always easier to negotiate an end to the war when people aren't shooting at each other. That's how the president believes. That's what we hope to achieve. The Ukrainians today have expressed their willingness and readiness to do so immediately. We hope the Russians' answer to that will also be yes.
But no deadline set, sir.
Well, the deadline is we hope to do this as soon as possible. Every day that goes by that this war continues, people die, people are bombed, people are hurt on both sides of this conflict. The president wanted this war to end yesterday and the day before. The president's been clear, so we wanted to see it as soon as possible. So our hope is that the Russians will answer yes as quickly as possible so we can get to the second phase of this, which is real negotiations, not never-ending dialogue, talk forever, but real negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's acceptable to both sides, sustainable, and that ensures the stability and security of Ukraine for the long term.
And on the goodwill gesture, is there anything like the return of the stolen children or anything that you're expecting in return?
Look, we've discussed a number of things, prisoner exchanges, folks that were detained and what have you, but the fighting has to stop. I mean, that's what we agreed today. And just think about it. We've gone from if the war is going to end to now how the war is going to end, and this was an important first step, and that was under President Trump's leadership. He has literally moved the entire global conversation to where we had a very senior Ukrainian delegation with us today. We've had engagements with our Russian counterparts, and now it's how the war is going to end, and that's under President Trump's leadership.
Just to answer your question.
It's really interesting because I think constantly undermining Ukraine and handing it to Russia and making it seem as though Russia is actually honestly and earnestly trying to pack this stuff up, and it's actually Ukraine that's like forcing this process to fall apart, might actually end up exploding in Trump's face. Because if Russia does stuff like this, where they turn around and say, yeah, no, we're not going to do a ceasefire. How about that? Then Donald Trump looks like an asshole. You feel me? And when you have no way of strong arming the Russian side because they are a foreign adversary, unless you also bring China to the table, for example, you're kind of going to look cooked. The Russian State Duma deputy Sobolev says the U.S. will rearm Ukraine in 30 days of ceasefire and will start the war anew. Russia will not go for it. This is pretty funny, especially because this is literally the argument that the Ukrainian side, or rather people who defend Ukraine have been making in terms of not doing a ceasefire. It's like, oh, we can't do a ceasefire because Russia will rearm and then pummel us further. And it's like, I've always maintained the position that a ceasefire is good because it allows people to feel safe. That has been a consistent position that I've maintained. But it's hilarious that the Russian side is now saying that. It's also additionally ridiculous that the Russian side is saying that, considering that the American side is not even like interested in offering intelligence until today. Like they restarted sharing intelligence with Ukraine. They had stopped it already. It's like obvious that Donald Trump is not interested in giving more. I mean, it's obvious that Donald Trump, at least in the way that he talks about this, is clearly more on Russia's side than any other previous administration. I think the reason why Donald Trump is at least aesthetically presenting himself as like pro-Russia in this process is because if I am to look for logic here, and it's very difficult to find a logical through line in the way that Donald Trump behaves because he is a madman, I would say that he recognizes that the battle lines do not favor Ukraine. They're not necessarily great for Russia either, but obviously Russia has more manpower to throw at the problem. And therefore, he wants to get out of this without hurting his own reputation. So he wants to basically pack up the Ukraine thing as a libtard Democrat thing, right? He wants to say like, no, it was the liberals and the Democrats. Ukraine is a gay, woke, liberal nation. And it's like a Democratic Party project. It's not me. That's why he's like actively trying to present himself as like anti-Ukraine and maybe even come across sometimes as though he is pro-Russia. There's obviously his own personal grievances against Ukrainian leadership. We talked about this before, whether it be obviously like the first impeachment, the perfect phone call that he had where he was looking for blackmail on Joe Biden and that didn't happen and he got impeached over it. He never really let that go. The fact that he also likes authoritarian strongmen and Vladimir Putin certainly fits that bill. These are all additional reasons as to why he is more sympathetic, seemingly, to the Russian side. Having said that, I think ultimately he recognizes that the exit Ukraine is always going to be bad. It's going to make America look bad because no matter what, any concession to your foreign adversary against your proxy is going to make you look weak. And Donald Trump does not want to look weak. So he's trying to pass the blame off to the liberal administration, making it seem as though he's like, I don't care about this Ukraine stuff. It's not me. I don't care about this. I've never been pro-Ukraine. I'm pro-Putin, actually. It's just those liberals that were pro-Ukraine, and they fucked it up. And that's why there's a loss that the American side incurred here. And I think that's what's going on. That's what I think that's the closest I can arrive at like some logical reason for why Donald Trump comes across as so Putin without broaching Krasnov KGB agent conspiracy theories. Caitlin Collins reports President Trump makes his first comments on the 30-day ceasefire that Ukraine has just agreed to following his talks in Saudi Arabia. He says, hopefully President Putin will agree to that. Also, and we can get this show on the road, Trump says. I think ceasefire is very important. So we'll see where that goes. But it doesn't seem like the Russian side is all too interested. Here is from the political editor of Bloomberg UK, in exclusive, Alex Wickham. He says, Vladimir Putin has made deliberately maximalist demands ahead of negotiations to end the war in Ukraine, which he knows are likely to be unacceptable to Kyiv and Europe, Western security officials told Bloomberg. There is no indication Putin is willing to compromise on any of his goals, and he is ready to continue fighting the war if he does not get what he wants, the people said. The assessments about Putin's intent cast doubt on whether he is serious about negotiating a realistic, lasting peace settlement with Ukraine. The compliance... They complicate Trump's efforts to secure a deal and clash with the president's belief that Putin wants peace. Putin has said Ukraine must formally commit to neutrality, abandon any ambition to join NATO, demilitarize and recognize Russian claims to annex territory. Lavrov has ruled out European peacekeepers. There is no sign those maximalist demands have changed. It raises the prospect that Trump would have to agree to all of Putin's terms if he wants a deal or walk away. Both would risk rupturing relations between the U.S. and Europe and seeing Ukraine fight on without U.S. support. Does it have to be a conspiracy theory that Trump is a Russian agent to assume that it's all about the dollars and he sees more potential for his personal interests aligning with Russia and Putin, Trump, Moscow, hotel, and businesses? No, this goes beyond that. The president, the head of this, especially when it comes to dealing with foreign adversaries, like in Saudi Arabia, yes, but in Russia, no. A head of a state is still going to have to factor in the material interests of the military-industrial complex and things of that nature. They can't just I think they'll get snipped up real quick if they were to step out of line far too much.
Question one more time. The goal here is peace. That's the president's goal. The best goodwill gesture the Russians can provide is to say yes. To say yes to the offer that the Ukrainians have made.
This is... What's really interesting about this is that because of Trump's aggressive posturing against Ukraine, seemingly on the side of Russia, all the way up until this very moment, they've set themselves up for failure in a spectacular way. If Russia turns around and says, yeah, no, then Trump is going to look like he undermined Ukraine for no reason, and he got cooked by Vladimir Putin. I don't know why he felt as though Putin would be committed to a full-blown ceasefire. There are some reasons as to why Putin would want to do a ceasefire. Those reasons, of course, are that he also doesn't want to maintain, permanent military conquest, and he is having his troops die. Things of that nature obviously play a role in your decision making, but it is interesting to see Donald Trump go out the bat this hard to basically attack Ukraine and leave himself this vulnerable. We'll see.
Stop the shooting, to stop the fighting, and get to the table. If they do that, that's the best goodwill sign we could see. Obviously, as part of that negotiation, as we're talking about how to end this conflict, there will be a lot of issues to unravel. Among them, not the least of which is the humanitarian concerns, the children, the prisoners of war, all the things that sadly come with these conflicts. But the number one goodwill gesture we could see from the Russians is to see the Ukrainian offer and reciprocate it with a yes.
All right. And next, for Reuters, Daphne Saladakis.
Thank you so much. Could you clarify what security assistance will be resumed? Does this include the PDAs? And why wasn't the minerals deal signed today? What are the outstanding issues there? And if I may, is the relationship with Ukrainian President Zelensky back on track? Do you back him?
Well, let me answer the second or the third. You had two, and then I'll let the security advisor talk about the defense and security assistance. On the second question, well, let me answer first on the minerals deal. As part of our communication today, that is something that was negotiated through our Treasury and his counterpart on the Ukrainian side. And so the president, and you see that expressed, both presidents will instruct the appropriate members of our governments to bring to finality the signature of the deal and the signature of this agreement. So that was communicated today, and that's going to happen. That was not the subject of our talks today. I thought I expressed that on our way in. We were here in pursuit of peace. That doesn't mean the minerals deal is not very important. It most certainly is. And statements we put out jointly that the president, our respective presidents, have instructed the appropriate members of their governments to bring this to finality and to conclusion. The second part of your question was?
Does the security assistance include...
No, there was one after that.
And the Zelensky relationship
There we go.
back on track?
Yeah. What's back on track here, hopefully, is peace. That's what matters the most. I know everyone's looking for who likes... This is serious stuff, okay? This is not Mean Girls. This is not some episode of some television show.
That's kind of funny. You're Trump's State Department lead, You're Trump's Secretary of State. Is pretty funny. He literally said this makes good television after nuking the mineral deal that he bullied Zelensky into signing this ceremonious deal. And then he just cast it aside specifically because he wanted to make good television. He said it himself. And you've been actively defending that this whole time. Is crazy.
This is very serious. Today people will die in this war. They died yesterday, and sadly, unless there's a ceasefire tonight, they'll die tomorrow. The president wants that to stop. That's what he's interested in here. That's why we came here. That's why we're grateful for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia hosting us here. And what we leave here with today is a commitment that the Ukrainians are ready to stop fighting. They're ready to stop the shooting. So
That's such a good point. Being forced to give concessions to Russia, it makes him look less weak if he frames Putin as his friend in the fight. You know Trump so well, Lamau. I mean, I think it only works if Vladimir Putin is down to pack this up. Like, if he wants to undermine America, this is the perfect opportunity for him to do so by just refusing, by simply refusing to concede on demands that he's forcing America to take to Ukraine. He can just like he will just sit back and watch Donald Trump sever relations that exist with European nations, and then also make him look like a fool. Weirdly enough, it makes it seem as though Vladimir Putin holds all the cards when it's supposed to be Donald Trump that holds all the cards.
So that they can get to the table and bring about peace for their country and for the world on the security.
Well, I mean, I mean,
you're just taking your deck of cards and you're handing it off to Putin for no reason. I want a ceasefire. Like, there are a lot of things that get lost in the madness here that Marco Rubio has also presented, that even Donald Trump has mentioned as well. There's a brutal honesty to the way that the American government operates and the way that Donald Trump talks about certain issues. Now, we're not even focusing on those things because Donald Trump is still actively undermining his own ceasefire negotiation that he's situation. It's a ridiculous self-own for no reason.
Echo enough. President Trump's president of peace. That's what he's demanding, and he's willing to take tough measures on it. Imagine getting your news from Hasan.
I know. You should be getting your news from real American patriots that are apolitical, like Asmongold, or people who are active sex pests who have hired Prince Andrew's law firm to belittle his victims, like Destiny, or OAN, One American News Network, baby. You should be getting your news from Fox News, brother. Imagine getting your news from Hasan. Goddamn.
All sides to drive that home. And in terms of the security assistance, it's the current Presidential Drawdown Authority. I'll refer to the Defense Department on the eaches of what munition was where in the process, but it's the current PDA that will proceed to the Ukrainians.
All right, everyone, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's fun stuff. That's fun stuff overall. Great stuff overall. On the Ukraine situation today,